after months of downplaying the severity of the coronavirus pandemic, the White House appears to finally be accepting the reality of a country unable to control a spiraling public health crisis, at least when it comes to matters regarding the president's own re-election campaign. In a White House briefing yesterday, the president announced he is calling off next month's Republican National Convention because of health concerns. The indoor event turned outdoor event was set to be held in Jacksonville, Florida, after being moved from North Carolina. But yesterday, the president acknowledged that now is, quote, not the right time to host a large crowd. But the president still wants students and teachers back in the classroom this fall, with some returning even earlier than the RNC was set to be held. The CDC has issued new guidelines for school reopenings while teachers plead for more resources to help keep everyone safe. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking on another set of relief package negotiations. Federal unemployment benefits are set to effectively expire tomorrow, leaving tens of millions of Americans in limbo. Here is some of what President Trump had to say in yesterday's briefing.
The Northeast has become very clean. The country is in very good shape, other than if you look south and west, some problems. That'll all work out. I hope that local leaders put the full health and well-being of their students first and make the right decision for children, parents, teachers, and not make political decisions. So I told my team it's time to cancel the Jacksonville, Florida component of the GOP convention. We have to be vigilant. We have to be careful. And we also have to set an example. I think setting the example is very important. It's hard for us to say we're going to have a lot of people packed in a room and then other people shouldn't do it. Don't forget, we're talking about schools, and we want them to be vigilant, and we're saying open, and then we're saying, here you have a big room. But I also, if you notice, I said where bars are crowded, where other things are crowded. Well, there's nothing more crowded than a convention. I mean, you've seen them.
Some verbal linguistics there from the president. Let's get straight to Ben Tracy, who's following the latest at the White House. So, Ben, let's begin with what we just heard from the president and the Republican National Convention, the plans for that. The president cites these safety concerns for the shuttering of the event. CBS News previously reported the Trump campaign was not happy with the turnout of the Tulsa rally. But what I find remarkable, Ben, two things. One, he was really not happy with the mayor of Charlotte and officials in Charlotte because they said several months ago that they were not prepared to host the Republican National Convention. So the president decided to move it to Florida. Now he's saying he's not going to hold it in Florida, but he's asking Americans to send their kids back to schools, and he's asking teachers to risk their lives by going back to those schools.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that don't quite add up, including the president saying that the reason he's doing this is to set a good example for the country, because keep in mind, just within the last month, the president packed a bunch of people into an arena in Tulsa. He packed a bunch of people into an auditorium in Phoenix. He tried to pack a bunch of people into an airplane hangar in New Hampshire. And just this past Sunday, in an interview with Fox News, he went on and on about how he's not able to have these rallies in states where he would like to have them. So this doesn't appear to be a conversion moment. It appears to be more facing the reality of what's going on in Florida, and that you just simply can't have 20,000 people in an arena. The president was also faced this week with the sheriff of Jacksonville coming out on Monday and saying, I can't secure this event, that I don't think this is safe. So there was pushback from officials in Florida as well, and this obviously was an outcome the president did not want, but inevitably had to face. And yes, it does not quite add up with what he's also asking schools to do, including schools in Florida.
Indeed. And he's sort of, it's very interesting when you listen to him speak, because he's continues to insist that schools should open. He's sort of holding, federal funding over the heads of some of districts, essentially saying, if you take the money, you really should open. But then at the same time saying, well, if you're in a hot spot, perhaps you should delay opening. And we know that he had initially said that the CDC guidelines for schools opening were too expensive. But now he doesn't seem to be pushing back as much on the CDC guidelines. What are we hearing? What are we hearing in regards to the CDC guidelines and how the White House is handling it?
Yeah, so let's walk through all of it. I mean, there's been a lot of changes this week. So just 2 days ago, the president said he wants schools open 100%. Those were the words that he used at the briefing. Then yesterday, he moderated that a bit and said in these hot spots, they might not be able to open right away. It'll be up to the governors in those states. But he still urged them to be making plans to reopen. You mentioned funding. He's gone a bit further than saying if they take the funding, they should reopen. He's basically said he wants to deny funding to schools that don't, give the money directly to parents so they can send their kids to private or charter schools. Now, that's not going to happen because that's not going to get through Congress, but that's where the president's mind is at on this. As for the CDC guidelines, there is new guidance out. They're not calling this revised guidelines, but the White House made no secret about the fact that they were not fans of the original guidelines. Vice President Pence said the quiet part out loud, saying we basically don't want this to be too tough. We don't want this to be a reason for schools not to reopen. So what we're seeing in these new guidelines, or additional guidance is what they're calling it, is basically the CDC getting in line with the White House. They're saying that there is little evidence that COVID is a big risk to young people, to young kids. Therefore, schools should reopen for a multitude of reasons, including obviously educational reasons, but also mental and social health. They do give some kind of perfunctory guidelines in terms of social distancing, perhaps putting kids in different cohorts within the school to keep them separated to reduce the risk of spread, washing your hands, wearing a mask, those sorts of things. But this is now guidelines that are very much in line with what the White House wants.
Ben, can I ask you a bit about campaign strategy going forward? A couple of things. One, the president clearly looking at his flagging poll numbers and thinking about that because he's given a number of interviews over the past couple of weeks, including 3 to Fox News. And I know that's his natural habitat, but 3 in 1 week is pretty significant. And the other thing I'm curious about, are you hearing from White House officials about the president of the United States in many of those interviews, in several of those interviews, trying to convince the American people that he is not cognitively impaired by constantly bringing up the what's called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment and saying to reporters, that he did exceptionally well on it, which, if you know anything about that assessment, it's for people, like, if you don't pass it, there's a problem, right? So are you hearing from the White House that they believe that this is a winning message for President Trump? Because they tried to paint Joe Biden as the one who had cognitive issues. That didn't seem to stick because the poll numbers don't bear that out. So do they think this is a winning strategy for Donald Trump?
I think this is something that White House officials and campaign officials would wish he did not talk about. Talking about Joe Biden's mental competency is certainly central to their campaign, but the president going on at length about being able to string together 5 words in a sentence and repeat them over and over again, for some reason the president is thinking of this as an IQ test that he has done very well on. That's not what the test is, so it just kind of comes off as a bit silly, and he seems to be very focused on it. One of the questions that I would love to have asked him yesterday at the briefing, he didn't call on me, so I didn't get a question, was, why do you keep repeating this? Do you feel that American voters are questioning your mental capacity? Is that the reason you keep trying to reinforce this message? But no, I think this is viewed mostly as a distraction and not something that's reflecting particularly well on the president.
I thought we got the message
Ben,
when he said he was a stable genius.
Well, I guess he wants to sort of underline it. Listen, I want to ask you about something that I think many, many Americans are biting their fingernails over. Whether or not Congress is going to settle on another stimulus package, people are running out of money. They're running out of they will run out of that additional $600 in unemployment. But if you read any of sort of the anecdotal stories, a lot of people are having trouble just getting their first round of unemployment, much less getting a second round of unemployment. Where are we at with this stimulus bill? We're supposed to get details from Senate Republicans. We didn't get it. It seems like the Democrats are at odds with the Republicans. The Republicans are at odds with other Republicans about what should be in this bill. Where are we?
Yeah, we're not off first base yet because the Republicans are still fighting amongst themselves in terms of what they want in their proposal. And it's really Senate Republicans not agreeing with the White House. They seem to have some competing interests. There are some things that they do seem to agree on. There's money for schools, $105 billion for schools to reopen, about $16 billion for testing. It appears that the sticking point is what you mentioned. It's this extension of the federal unemployment benefit that has been giving people about $600 per week to augment lost wages for those who have lost their jobs. A lot of Republicans either want to get rid of that altogether or they think it's too generous. Their fear is that some people are getting paid more on unemployment now when you combine the federal benefit with the state benefit than they were making at their jobs, and that might be a reason some people are staying home to work. There's not hard data on that as to whether or not that argument is valid, but that is their argument. So they're going back and forth. But keep in mind, this is a bill that Senator Mitch McConnell wanted to put on the floor yesterday. He wanted to unveil their proposal and then start negotiations with Democrats next week. Until the Republicans come together and agree on something, those negotiations won't begin. And those negotiations are going to be tough. This is not a bill that's anywhere close to passing because the Republicans are looking at something in the $1 trillion range and the Democrats are looking at something in the $3 trillion range. That is a big, big difference when you talk about the way that they want to fund this fourth round of stimulus.
Ben, before we let you go, let me ask you about China shutting down an American consulate after the United States did the same in Texas a few days ago. You bring unique perspective to this because you were for quite some time our correspondent in Beijing. How do you see this playing out, and has the White House responded to this latest move by Beijing?
Yeah, so this is the consulate in Chengdu, and if you're a tourist in China, this is the part of China you would go to for spicy Szechuan food or to see pandas. That's kind of what that area is known for. So China has retaliated against the United States for closing down the consulate in Houston. By closing this one down in that part of China. We did get a response from the White House, actually just within the last couple of minutes, from the National Security Council. They said, we urge the CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party, that's how they refer to them, to cease these malign actions rather than engage in tit-for-tat retaliation. The malign actions that they're talking about is the accusation by the U.S. government that the Chinese are trying to steal intellectual property and spy on Americans. They say that is the reason that they shut down that consulate in Houston. So this is certainly going back and forth, and the Chinese government is not happy about this at all. They have responded, and let me read to you what they said. They have said that this is basically going to sabotage the relationship with the United States and that the Chinese government will not shut down. And one thing to note, this comes just on the heels of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo yesterday giving a very strong anti-China speech at the Nixon Library out in California, where he said this. He said, if we bend the knee now to China, our children's children may be at the mercy of the Chinese Communist Party, whose actions are the primary challenge today in the free world. That is the kind of rhetoric you would have heard with the United States and Russia back during the Cold War. So this relationship continues to deteriorate and is not moving in a great direction.
Yeah, definitely, Ben. Thank you so much.
Thanks.